everybody. Welcome back to Every Day is Saturday. I'm Matt Stahl, along with my partner, Brad Gatto. We are excited to dive into a topic that I found very interesting today, but some people may not. I did. I thought that was fascinating. Today we're going to talk about long-term care.
All right.
Some people's ears perk up, but others may not so much. Before we dive into that, what have you been up to?
I don't think you should have told them that, because now they might just tune out.
No, stick around. It's fascinating.
It actually is. And it's important because it affects actually the vast majority of people now at the end of life. So, But your more important question, what have you been up to? I actually just got back from a vacation with my family. Yeah. We were able to unplug for a little while. We took our boys, who are now 12 and 9, to Hawaii. And I mean, there's zero complaints about Hawaii. Like, there's no more ridiculous place on the planet.
Yeah.
It's just really hard to get to.
Yeah. How long was the flight?
Well, it's a little over 3 to LA. We flew to LA and then flew from LA we went to the Big Island because we want to see the volcanoes and do all the outdoor stuff with the boys. And then, so from LA to Big Island is probably 5 hours, 20 minutes, something like that.
Okay.
So total,
not as bad as I thought. But.
Total, you're about 8.5 hours of flight time.
That's a long time. Did you rely on the old devices to keep them occupied? Or?
For sure. Yeah. I would be lying if I said we didn't allow them some screen time on the airplanes. But there was books, homework. I have one kid that's a little bit behind on his homework. So
good opportunity to catch up.
It was good. We left at the perfect time.
Yeah.
It snowed in Minnesota in October, the day after we left, and came back and it was 70 degrees.
Yes. I love it.
So it was perfect. How about you?
Not quite as far flung. We did go up to explore the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which
Uper now.
So I suppose everything's kind of gray and brown around here.
Yeah.
And I expected to get more of that. And the cool thing was, the further north we got, the more colors we saw. So I don't know. It was a different type of tree.
Seems weird.
It was like tamarack trees. So I think the timing's a little bit different.
No idea what that is.
Aspen or birch trees. Is it? If we have aspen or birch trees here?
Yeah.
Which one is it?
Birch.
Okay. Those, I think, colors.
Do we not have aspen? I know we have birch.
I don't know if it's the same thing. They look similar. So the tamarack tree is like a pine tree that changes colors.
Oh.
So when you see the yellow pine tree, that's a tamarack.
Oh, right. Learn something new.
Large tree.
We can end the podcast right here.
Anyhow, we went up the UP. It was really cool. Quick trip. Not Hawaii, but it was nice to get away and get out.
You went the wrong way.
So we did go the wrong way. It was beautiful though. It was 70 degrees.
Yeah. So, well, that's awesome. I can't believe you led the podcast off by telling people, "Oh, this is super." Prove me wrong.
Prove me wrong.
Prove me wrong.
Let's do it. All right. So we've talked about this a little bit before hitting record today, but I think that just the concept of long-term care in general is kind of fascinating. Like when you look at the grand scheme of things, right? How this has become such a huge thing.
Well, and I guess, let me be clear. My bias towards it being quote unquote not interesting just comes from the fact that I have to talk to people about this.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't like it. Because it's
you want to talk about the fun stuff.
Yeah, it's a morbid conversation. It's not like people don't just like, you know what? When I pay me a picture of your retirement, nobody ends that story with, "Oh, I want to do these things. I want to retire at this date. I want to do this. I want to do this." And then when I'm older, I really hope that I need assistance in my living for at least a couple of years. That's, it's not usually part of people's
that's
dream.
Very true. I have to share it. Let's lighten this up a little bit.
All right.
Okay? So we just did a workshop on this recently, an internal workshop here. And Scott, one of our very own Scott Airy, told a joke that I think is going to lighten this up a little bit.
I don't know if we should repeat that joke.
Did you hear it?
I did. Go for it. Hey, we swung the bat once. Let's go.
What do you call an assisted living facility with a buffet?
Well, I know the answer. So what is it, Matt?
It's Golden Corral.
We may have to edit this out. We'll see if it makes the cut. Well, and then we're just going to end it there.
Well, there you go. Now it's a little more fun. But.
Yeah, it is fascinating the fact that it's new. It's not brand new, but this being an issue that affects most, right, okay. is new. So to that end, tell us.
I'm going to take a time out. Let's define what long-term care is before we go any further.
Fair.
So I think a lot of us, when we hear the word long-term care, some sort of image probably pops up to us. And I just want to read the definition according to the NIA. Long-term care involves a variety of services designed to meet a person's health or personal care needs during a short or long period of time.
Very, very narrow definition.
Very, very general. But I think, at least for me, when I think of long-term care, the first thing I would picture is a nursing home.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably in line with a lot of other people would assume. But
well, and I think simply, Matt, that's because that was the first line of defense. Like when it came to this first kind of blossomed as a need in this country, that was what was created.
Yeah.
Now in 2022, we've got, that's kind of the end of the line, right? Complete confinement, complete care. But we've got multiple steps in between. Like I'm young, spry, I do everything on my own. And then I'm fully confined and needing help with basically almost every activity of daily living that there is. And so whether that's, just a senior community, or that's an assisted living facility, or home health care now, and options to be able to stay at home, and even other things. There's just all kinds of options to have any sort of assistance at the end of life. And so when we talk about activities of daily living, there's the things you would think of, right? Showering, eating, transportation,
going to the restroom.
Yeah. Things like that. And needing assistance to kind of just do the basic things that necessitate getting through a day.
Yep. Yeah. So that's our definition that we're working with. And we've talked about how, well, if you go back to the 80s and we look at, the history from then until now, this has become more and more prevalent. And it's kind of fascinating how our society has organized itself and arranged itself. And that was something I was excited to dive into because I kind of expected, you and I have talked about this, with air travel and interstates. And it seems as though families live further and further away from each other, which would make sense that, that historically you would think extended family would be there to help care for others. Yeah. And that's kind of seems to be a trend that's going in a different direction.
Yeah.
And
at the end of the day, Matt, of all the things that we talk about, like whether in retirement, there's not too many things that overlap, from, person A's retirement and kind of their scenario, their picture, what they want to happen, what's actually going to happen versus, client B or person B. This is one of those things where we've crossed the threshold that the majority of people will have the need for some sort of care. Again, it could be home health care. It could be you're in assisted living. You could be all the way down the line to complete confinement in a long-term care facility. But by definition, needing some sort of assistance at the end of life being provided by an outside service or an outside person. We've crossed that threshold where the vast majority of people are going to end up needing that. In fact, the percentage is closer to 70%.
Yep. So a 65-year-old today, the chance is 70% that there's some sort of long-term care.
Yeah. So not only are more people needing it, but there's reasons for that. And the couple of reasons that as we looked into this, that we found, you mentioned one of them already. And that is the fact that it used to be that when you had kids, that those kids stuck around.
Yep.
Right. And they lived right next to you or they lived with you.
Right.
Right. And they kind of took over whatever mom and dad did.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so if the dad was doing this and he's a farmer, greatest example, because we were a farming community, farming society, and really until about the Great Depression, until we started becoming a more modern, the Industrial Revolution, all that kind of stuff. You take over the farm. And you just stayed and you took over the farm. So when mom and dad got all the needed care, the kids were around to provide that care, and the families kind of took care of each other. And so, but that's not the case anymore. Yeah. And a lot of that is precipitated by education.
Yep. You know what I'm excited? You're the stats guy usually, and I have all the stats right now. I kind of feel like this.
You feel empowered?
I do. Not usually my department, but I did dig into this. It was really interesting. So Pew Research. So just pulled a bunch of numbers from this, and it was 42% of adults with a postgraduate degree live at least within 1 hour of an extended family. So 1 hour's drive. That's the definition of closest.
So 42% do live within an hour.
42% do. And so the higher you go up that scale, the less likely they are to live close to extended family, which we would interpret as parents. So 48% with a bachelor's degree live within an hour's drive. 56% with some college experience, and 63% of adults with a high school diploma or less still live within an hour's drive of extended family.
So it's interesting because basically what you're saying is the more education, especially the more post-secondary education that these kids are receiving, the more apt they are to live more than an hour away from mom and dad.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
And so what we're talking about here is not only just in modern America, the ease of being able to move. Right. A couple hundred years ago, if you wanted to move across the country, it took you 30 years to get to the other side of the country in your covered wagon. We've all played the Oregon Trail, right? I actually just got to listen to a podcast on Lewis and Clark. It was like a 5-episode. It was super interesting what those guys went through to try to travel west. And now it's a 5-hour flight from New York to San Francisco, right? Like you just kind of, so the world is far more connected. So people are just more apt to live further away just because you can.
Yeah.
Right. And then on top of that, a lot of what's leading that is not just the fact that you can, it's education, which we found quite interesting.
Exactly. So we look at that trend and then we look at just the trend for higher education and the direction that we've been heading historically. So back in 1960, 7.7% of the US population had graduated from college.
Wow.
So
wait, take that. 1960, 7.7% had graduated from any college.
From any college. Yep.
Wow.
We compare that with 2020, 37.9% of the US population had graduated from college.
That's crazy.
Or any other higher education. So you see that trend going up. And
it's like a 5x growth
in that period of time. And you overlay that on top of the likelihood of people living further away. And it makes a lot of sense.
Right. So the trend is just going to continue is basically what the point that you're trying to make is not only are more people less, if you have any college experience, or degree, there's less than a 50% chance you're going to live within an hour of your parents. And more people are going to college. So this problem of kids moving away and not being around to basically care for mom and dad when they need it at the end of life is just going to continue to grow.
That's what it seems to point to.
Yeah,
absolutely. The second thing we talked about was just the trend in life expectancy.
Yeah. So not only are kids not around, so if you need care, you're less likely to be taken care of by kids, but the amount of people that need care is growing because people are living longer. So modern medicine is great in the fact that it cures a lot of things that we, died from not that long ago, and kind of keeps us moving and ticking, but it also increases the odds that you're going to need care at the end of life.
Yeah. So what we just looked at this, the life expectancy in 1935.
No.
60.7.
60 years old.
60
Not
years
yet
old.
Quite 61.
Right.
And that was in what year?
1935.
1935. We looked at that. I asked Matt to look at that number because that's the year that Social Security was enacted. And so now the first check didn't go out until 1941, but it was enacted in 1935. And full Social Security age, which is now 67, back then was 65.
Huh.
But the average life expectancy from birth to life wasn't even 65, right? So that tells you kind of what their thought process was with Social Security. It was meant to be like an end of life benefit, right? Like for the last couple of years of life, if you're still around, because half the people didn't even make it to less than half the people, because only half the people made it to 60. 65 was when it kicked in. So they were anticipating with Social Security that less than half of the people that were born would ever even make it long enough to receive a check, let alone multiple checks.
Tune into our Social Security episode for more.
You should have done a deeper voice for that.
Oh, sorry. You're absolutely right. Where's the sound effects? So life expectancy was 60.7 back in 1935.
Yep.
2020, it was about 79 years old, just shy of 79. So you look at that trend, and we're actually looking at a graphic that is just up and to the right.
We could probably put that link in the show notes.
Yeah.
If we want to. Yeah. So people are going to look at the graphic. So the bottom line is we've added about 19 years to life expectancy.
Yep.
But let's go back to, let's just say, because we're talking, the people that primarily care about this conversation right now, frankly, are kind of the boomer generation.
Yep.
Maybe a little bit on the front end of the boomers. So people are a little bit older than a boomer, and maybe a couple on the lower end, not quite born after 1964. But for the most part, this is kind of a conversation for that generation. So in 1960, you still have that graph pulled up. What was the life expectancy in 1960? Like 55,
1960
or 50.
Yeah, it was
some of the boomer age.
Just shy of 70.
So we've added 9 years since then. And in 1950, I think we've added 11 years to life expectancy since then. And so when you look at, we defined long-term care. There's also statistics of how long the average person needs care. And it's different for men and women.
Yep.
And it's significantly different.
It is.
Which is interesting. What are those numbers?
So a woman, this is based on a 65-year-old today,
okay.
But average length of care for a woman is 3.7 years, and for a man is 2.2 years, aka the guy dies.
Yeah. Yeah.
End of care.
I mean, that's
quote.
It's almost double, which is crazy. But if we just average that out and let's just call it 3 years.
Yep.
That's about right in the middle. So you need care for about 3 years. And when you start to think about life expectancy and what modern medicine has done, again, there's a lot of positives to it. So don't take this as it's an overall negative. But because of that, now we can stay alive with things that used to kill us, frankly.
Yep.
But we need assistance. And the average length of time we need assistance, if we just kind of mesh male, female together, is about 3 years.
Yeah.
And it makes sense when you think about it. We've added 9 to 11 years of life expectancy, kind of depending if you're born on the front end of the boomer generation or the back end of the boomer generation. We're just living a lot longer.
Right. And so, as we said, 70% of people are expected to need that care.
Yeah. So you're right. This is interesting. I will eat crow. One of the things we talk about a lot, Matt, is with the families that we work with, and we've talked about it on this podcast before, is the fact that this generation are trailblazers in a lot of ways, right? Because this idea of a modern retirement and being able to live on the money that you've saved for multiple decades possibly is new in a lot of ways. New because pensions are dying, and so the onus is on these boomers to save their own money. 401ks, things like that, it didn't exist until the 70s. It's new because they're living longer. We just talked about that. And so not only is you have to save your own money for the most part, but you have to do it for a longer period of time, because even if you retire at the same age as mom and dad did, you're going to live 9 to 10, 12 years longer than they did. But we are actually retiring earlier, right? Mom and dad's generation, pre-boomers, the Great Depression generation, their life expectancy was much shorter, but they tended to work longer too. So they kind of just worked until the day they died a lot of times.
Yep. And
this is another piece to that conversation of being a trailblazer. Maybe not where you want to be a trailblazer, in this realm of needing assistance at the end of life, but it is new.
It is new. Yeah.
It is new. And so something that needs to be understood and discussed and definitely needs to be part of your overall plan. Again, not the fun part of the plan that anybody wants to deal with. It's fun to buy a brand new car. It's not fun to go insure it.
It is not. So we know that we're likely going to need some sort of care. We know it's probably going to be around 3 years if we average everything out. The average cost, and this is an assisted living facility in the United States, is about $95,000. When you look across,
$95,000 a year
per year. And again, that's an average.
Yep.
And this is where the planning gets even more important. Quiz question. Where do you think the most expensive care is in the United States? I hope we don't know the answer.
I do know the answer.
You do? Dang it.
Connecticut.
Yes. So, and it was about $139,000 a year. There's a really interesting tool that I'm not sure that we can share, but maybe you could ping us if you're interested, where you can actually compare regions. And I plugged that in and looked at even just locally here, from one city to the next that aren't very far away, the cost and care is drastically different. So from a planning perspective, that's where it makes sense to put some thought into what your plan is.
But your statistic was assisted living,
yes.
Right? It wasn't long-term care facility,
right,
or home health care. Those kind of in between.
Yeah.
Yep. Kind of an assisted living facility.
Yes.
Okay.
So we know we're likely going to need care. It's going to be pretty pricey. Yep. We know it's probably going to last a little while. Now, what the heck do we do about it?
Yeah. I mean, to use if we just use the complete averages of everything and just boil it down to the middle, average between male, female is 3 years. Average cost of care is $95,000. If you're using rounded numbers, there's a 70% chance you got about a $300,000 liability in front of you.
Right. Yep.
That's a pretty good chance.
That's a pretty good chance. And chances are they're probably going to go up over time.
A lot of percentages and a lot of chances. I hope you guys are following along and taking very diligent notes at home. A lot of statistics, a lot of chances. That said, Matt, so what's the solution? So we've got this problem. It's fairly obvious. It's also interesting because the people the families that we work with, that there's some of them that come in the door that are so anti this discussion, let alone finding a creative way to solve for the problem. And then there's other families that are like way on the other end. Like they bring it up to us. And it's always because there's somebody in their family went through some sort of care and it created financial havoc on their family. And so they want to make sure that it's solved for. And it's just and I brought this up in a previous episode when we weren't specifically talking about long-term care, but I brought up the fact that this is probably the most polarizing issue that we discuss with people. But interesting enough, I can't think of a lot of other things that are going to happen in retirement that there's across the board, 70% of the people that we talk to are going to deal with it.
They experience the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So we look at it, we say, the high likelihood that this is going to happen.
Yeah.
We do have the data and the information. Now our options are, we can look at that. We can really go down the list. We can say, we're going to self-insure, which just means, hey, we've saved so much money over time that we're going to peel off this dedicated portion of our assets, and we're going to use that to pay for the cost of care down the road.
Yeah. With everything in life that you can insure, because you can insure basically anything that you want.
Yeah.
Do you remember back in the day when athletes, like it first started, that athletes were insuring parts of their body?
Yeah. It was Lloyd's of London, I think, was the insurer. Or
the case that I think of is Willis McGahee. Do you remember that?
I remember
running back from I think it was from Miami, and he played in the bowl game, and I think he ended up insuring himself. I think that's why this story sticks with me,
because he's going to go into that.
Somebody's going to fact check me, and I'm going to get part of this wrong, but he was going to get drafted like basically everybody thought first overall, or high in the first round. He had millions of dollars at stake, and his leg got literally like bent in half the wrong way in this bowl game. But he had gotten insurance on his body parts. So all that to say, you can insure basically anything that you want. And Matt and I have talked about this before too, but just as a reminder, insurance by definition is just transferring risk that you have in your life to somebody else that either you just don't want. I don't want the risk on my life, or it's because you can't afford the risk.
Right.
Because in other words, you kind of have to. In other words, there's only two reasons to ever buy any type of insurance: is because you want to or because you have to. And so self-insuring is just a fancy way of saying, I don't need the insurance. I can afford the risk. I've got $300,000 that I can kind of parse out of my overall plan and set it aside and know that it's going to be there, so that if I'm going to play the averages, and that's what, after discussion, we decided we're just going to play the coin flip, that it's there and solving for that need.
And the big assumption we're making there is that we feel like we have a good grasp on how much this is going to go up in costs over time.
Yeah.
Right. So
there's been inflation to the cost of care and medical expenses.
Everything else, just not that.
The inflation rate in healthcare is insane.
Just general inflation and the demand and the future demand, lots of question marks when it comes to that. So we assume we're going to self-insure. We look to transfer the risk elsewhere. And this is where Medicaid comes in. And this is, I think, historically where I've found the most confusion. When, I don't know if you've had the same experience, but when you start this, I've heard the comments when you start this conversation with people in the past, where sometimes they'll say, well, that's Medicare's going to cover that for me.
Yeah.
Have you had that experience?
Yes.
So Medicare has very little to do with long-term care insurance and paying for that. It's actually Medicaid, which is a state-by-state program that is in conjunction with the federal government. But each state has different guidelines. Some of them are more similar. But basically, the way that Medicaid program works is if you were to exhaust all of your assets down to certain guidelines, that I'm just going to use Minnesota as an example because we're recording from Minnesota. But if Katie and I are at that point in our life, we would have
Katie's your wife.
So Katie's my wife. Hopefully long-time listeners know that. So, thanks for the clarification. If we were to exhaust all of our assets, keep in mind this is all income and assets. down to one house, one car, and $3,000. That's when Medicaid would kick in to pick up the cost.
Said more simply, they will make you spend everything you have.
Yep.
They will leave you with exactly $3,000 in one vehicle and a house to live in. Then the state will kick in and start paying for the care or assistance that you need.
As long as it's in a Medicaid approved facility.
Right. Which
may not be
ideal.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's one of those deals, just to be very blunt about it. Like if you were shopping for where you wanted to receive your assistance and you had a brochure or a magazine where you're picking, it wouldn't be the Medicaid facilities, approved facilities that you would be like, you'd be like, oh, I want to go to that one.
In my experience, no.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I wouldn't say I have a deep level experience with that, but what I do, that is 100% accurate.
And I don't want to say, I want to say it's like, it's terrible or that that shouldn't be your plan. Generally speaking, that's not anybody's first choice,
right?
Is to basically spend down absolutely everything that they have outside of $3,000 and then go into a Medicaid approved facility. That's usually not plan A. Again, it's better than nothing. And I'm glad that our state has it. And, this has all been born out of, again, going back to the 1930s and the social welfare programs that were put in place after the Great Depression. And so I'm glad that it's there. So I don't want to diminish it because it is an option. But there are a lot of people that try to avoid the spend down. Right. So I think it's worth addressing for just a second before we kind of go to the third option.
Yes.
Because knowing that this is coming, a lot of families like kind of in, I would say the last minute, mom and dad, they realize they're getting to that point of their life where they're going to need care. And it's usually within the next 12 months that this conversation starts to happen. Like, oh, mom's going to have to go into a facility in the next 12 weeks or, month or whatever it may be. What do we do? Because we don't want all these assets to go to pay for this. And so how do we get the state to pay for it? And so they try to basically rid mom and dad of the assets, right?
This was also really fascinating. I have a really funny story that I've remembered over time. If you can dig in, I found a website where you can actually look at the history of long-term care going back to 1960, just all these different events that have taken place. And so bringing up what you were just saying, again, that's another conversation I would found that I would have where they'd say, well, we're just going to move everything out of mom and dad's. And it's, well, at one point in time, for a short period of time, you could actually do that.
Yep.
And it's just layering on all these little loopholes where you'd find them. If you look at the history, those loopholes are just taken away one by one. So if we were trying to do that, it's actually a 5-year clawback period where anything you had tried to do that with would actually be pulled back in and be required to spend down. So
So in other words, you've got to have a lot of foresight.
Yes.
At least 5 years.
Right.
Foresight to remove assets from their estate. One of the most recent loopholes that's gotten closed, and the only reason I bring this up is because it's the most common way that people try to hide assets, so to speak, at least that I've seen. I get asked about it more than anything, is annuities. There were certain, they call them Medicaid annuities, that you could put the money in there, turn an income stream on, and because it was an income stream and it wasn't an asset anymore, you could get away with it. And that was one of the last loopholes that's closed, but it's also closed.
Yeah.
And so the IRS and the states have kind of figured this out, and it's kind of Fort Knox. I mean, it's basically 5 years. Don't try any funny business, and then you can go to the state-run care. So that's option number 2. Option number 1 is self-insure. Option number 2 is to plan for the spend down. And just be okay with it, and just know that you're going to go into a Medicaid approved facility. Option number 3 is
to transfer the risk elsewhere.
Yeah.
So insurance.
Yeah.
And as you dive into that, that's also very fascinating. And that there was a lot of insurance companies that jumped into the long-term care insurance market to begin with. And that I was excited to dig into these stats. So I've always said in the 80s and 90s, a whole bunch of insurance companies jumped in, and a lot of them have fallen off because they realized that they didn't know how to charge premiums for this type of insurance.
They priced it wrong.
They priced it wrong, big time.
It'd be like GM coming out with a new car that costs them $50,000 to build, and they charge $20,000 for it.
Right.
It doesn't last very long.
Well put.
Right.
So
Well, and the problem is, because I've dug into this in the past too, and I remember what the first time I was reading about this, because I was curious. I was like, how did they all get it so wrong?
Right.
Because what was the number? How many insurance companies used to be in the long-term care game?
So that what I was able to dig up was, as of 2000, there was 104 companies
that you could buy long-term care from.
Yeah. And as of 2020, the estimated was 12. That's pure long-term care insurance, right?
12. So when they started building these products, like we said, this is kind of a new thing, right? Trailblazers, like this idea of needing this type of care. And so this was a new insurance. And so they were trying to price it and try to, well, what do we do? Like, how do we know what's appropriate and how much we should charge for premiums and what we should cover and kind of what we don't cover? And as you know, with a lot of different types of insurances, like with car insurance, you can add full glass coverage, or you can have a higher deductible, or you can add more lines for personal body injury and all this other kind of stuff. There's a lot of nuance, even though it's all car insurance. Long-term care is the same. Like, how do you want to cover like a daily benefit, a monthly benefit, some sort of cost of living adjustment, all this stuff? At the end of the day, the crux of the pricing that the actuaries were using was on disability insurance. And they thought, okay, well, we assume that the claims percentages of people using the policies will be similar to disability. We'll charge based on that. Well, lo and behold, here we sit in 2022, and the statistics say about 70% of the people that buy it are going to use it.
Right.
Whoops.
Whoopsie.
So there's 12 left.
So that brings us to today. If we're having this conversation with someone and we know what our options are, and we choose that we want to transfer that risk elsewhere, that has also evolved. Yeah. So it's not only just what I would say is pure long-term care insurance, or just means I'm paying for this, and
it's car insurance, but for long-term care.
Right.
It's you write a check, it covers it. If you don't use it, you don't get the money back. It's just covering just that thing.
So we've seen that evolve further into what I would term, and maybe you'll correct me if this is just a hybrid product.
Yep. Before we get into the hybrid, let me say this too, because some of the listeners probably have the traditional policies.
Yeah.
The old long-term care policies, old as in at least probably 7, 8 years old. You bought it at least 7, 8 years ago, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. Most of those are like finding a dinosaur.
Yeah.
And Cadillac. You're like, they just don't exist. I don't want to like give a complete broad brush here, but the odds are on favorite that you have something you could never get again. Don't let go of it.
That was not specific financial advice, but
correct. That's why I said this is not everybody. I'm not giving advice, but the idea is they mispriced it in your favor,
right?
Like bank error in your favor, collect $200.
Yes,
in Monopoly kind of thing.
Yes, for those that are not experiencing increasing premiums on a regular basis.
Well, and but that is regulated too, because the state, they have to go to the state in which they provide coverage, and the state has to approve the increase in premium. And the only way they're going to prove it is if the insurance company can prove that they're losing money. And so it's not like they're trying to gouge at this point. They're beyond that. They completely whiffed when they created these policies, years ago. And so it is just a pure cost of coverage. And even with these increased premiums, a lot of times they're still really, really good policies, better than anything you could buy today.
Yeah. So you think about this, it makes a lot of sense. A hybrid. So an example of a hybrid solution. So if I'm someone that already has long-term care insurance in place and I've had it for a while, chances are I'm going to dig into that and realize, okay, I can check that off the box.
Yep.
If I'm just now looking at this, then chances are one of my options ends up being some sort of hybrid approach.
Yep.
And if you think about this, it can make a lot of sense. And the way that a hybrid product would work, and Brad's much more of an insurance expert than I am, so he may chime in here. But
all you. I'm putting you on the spot. You put me on the spot all the time with statistics. So here you go, brother. Figure it out.
So, example of this: if I own a life insurance policy, as of today in this recording, we know for a fact, as long as I keep paying my premium, I hold up my end of the deal, that's going to pay out.
Yep.
Correct. So I'm going to die someday.
You are
that. So yes,
later than me. Listen to a previous episode where we talked about longevity, because I eat bologna. We got to peg what episode that is. People got to go back. That's ridiculous. We both took a very detailed life expectancy thing, and his was much longer. I don't remember the exact numbers. You're just going to way outlive me, and it's because I ate bologna. I don't even eat bologna. That's ridiculous. I got lumped in.
It was clumped in with bagels.
Yeah, bagels. Yeah, bologna and bagels. I don't understand.
So I have this life insurance policy that Katie, my wife, is going to receive $2 million if I die. So this makes a lot of sense if you think about it. A hybrid product would say, hey, as the insurance company, we know we're going to pay that out at some point. And you know what? If you have some sort of long-term care costs, if you're a guy, chances are you're going to croak within 2.2 years. So
technical term.
It doesn't make as much difference to us if we pay that out 2 years earlier or if we wait. And so the life insurance arm of this would say, hey, you can access some of that death benefit before you die to pay for those costs. And in that example, say I had, used up $100,000 of my death benefit to pay for those costs, then I pass away, then Katie receives $1.9 million rather than $2 million.
Yep.
So
there definitely is some nuance in there, but generally speaking, at the end of the day, you're just covering two different risks with one policy, which is why it's called a hybrid policy. It's no different than a hybrid car that runs on both electric and internal combustion. It's covering your life, which we're all going to die, right? And so if it's a permanent life policy, so that if, to your point, you keep paying premiums, it's going to be around until the day you die, you can tap into that death benefit ahead of time for the use of qualified care. Now, every policy has different iterations of like what they deem their definition of qualified care as and how you can trigger that type of event. So be very careful because sometimes there's gotchas where like one looks really cheap compared to another one, but it's because to be able to trigger and actually use it's much harder. And so my stance on this is always, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, usually is. And to make sure that we're using carriers that are big, well-rated, going to be around to pay premiums and benefits, and frankly are easy to deal with. Because if you think about the phase of life that you're in, when you actually need to use this, the idea or concept of dealing with it, because we've all probably had experiences with insurance companies in the past where you go to file a claim. It could be car insurance, it could be life insurance, it could be homeowners insurance, whatever. You go to file a claim and the insurance company is just a bear to deal with. And the onus is on you to prove that you need the insurance and all this stuff. And sometimes it's just completely ridiculous. And of all insurances, this is the one where you really, at this phase of life, don't want to be arguing and wrestling with the insurance company to get them to pay out. And so just important that you find somebody that has a good reputation.
Really, really good point that I don't think a lot of people think about. So.
Well, and just for us, it's just because we've dealt with it, right? We've got families on all three of these quote unquote plans, right? We've got families that are self-insuring. We've got families that are on the spend down thought process. We've got other families that own some sort of either personal long-term care, traditional policy, or some sort of hybrid policy. There isn't a right or wrong answer, right, of how to plan for this. The right answer is to plan for it. The wrong thing to do is to think that there's one answer for everybody and that everybody should just buy insurance, or everybody should self-insure, everybody should just wait for the spend down. The correct answer is more about what you want out of life, what you want out of your money, and kind of how you want all of that to play out is going to kind of point you in the direction that's going to make the most sense for your family. If we impress upon anything with this podcast, it's just that there's a 70% chance that if you don't plan for this, you missed it.
Right.
And there's not a lot of things in life where the probability of something happening to you is that high.
Dying.
Other than dying. That's correct. Yeah.
One thing we didn't go into in a lot of detail, and
Jesus
didn't.
How do you think the insurance companies would handle that? And he's back. We're going to need our death benefit back, please.
I'm sure there's some sort of clause in there. Very deep. The one thing, we won't go into immense detail with this, but the partnership program is something that exists state by state, where if I go get a pure long-term care insurance policy, that $3,000 number that I was referencing earlier, we can actually have some influence over that and change that number based on the type of policy we buy.
So you can buy up the spend down.
You could buy out the spend down, which is essentially you're thinking about, I'm preserving some of my assets. Now, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much because I just want to reiterate how important it is to actually have the conversation and look at it from a planning perspective, as opposed to just, we need to go get this product and check it off the list.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And I don't know why this thought just came into my head, but going back to this idea of kids moving away, and that's part of the problem that we have, and we're living longer and more people need care. I said there's 3 options. A 4th option could be that you actually have somebody that can care for you.
Right.
That your kids didn't move away. They're totally like, that's part of the plan. Like I have friends that are, have houses where they're built so that mom and dad can move in,
Absolutely.
When necessary. And so it's not like that's a zero, that's never going to happen. And so I guess that is a 4th option that I forgot to mention.
Yep. Excellent.
I'm not going to take care of you though. So you're going to have to figure out.
Yeah.
Something else.
That was a clue.
Yeah. A clue for what?
I don't know.
Okay. This just went sideways. I will tell you though, you were right. This was far more interesting than I anticipated it being. And it is one of those conversations that even after a podcast like this, I still don't like having it because it's not fun. I wrote a book called Spending Money, Having Fun. There is a chapter in there on long-term care, actually.
There you go. Reframe it. Hey, once you take care of the basics, now you can think about the fun stuff.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, you kind of check this one off the list, put it in the plan, and then just go enjoy life and know that it's taken care of.
Absolutely.
No matter where you need care, how you need care. So that's a good point. That's a good place to wrap this up. So thanks everybody for listening to another episode of Every Day is Saturday. We do the best that we can to provide educational content, whether it's topics like this that some people would think are super interesting and others not, even though they can be turned around, to tell you stories about people living every day as Saturday type lives and to impart as much wisdom and knowledge as we can in a lot of these different areas. And so we appreciate you listening to the podcast. We would ask that you join us the next time. If you have any questions on long-term care about how to cover yourself or a family member is dealing with it or anything else like that, please reach out to us here at fiatwm.com is our website. All of our contact information is going to be there. We would love to give you further education or answer any questions you have on a frankly, just a very, very important topic. So thanks for listening. Like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, tune in next time. We would love to have you back. And until then, enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you all next Saturday.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.